My name is Eleanor Wilson. I'm 68, and just 1 week after my husband's funeral, my son and his wife tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. Before I tell you all about the emergency board meeting where I revealed their $120,000 secret and gave my son the choice between his inheritance and his wife, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The scent of wilting lilies still hung in the air, a sweet, cloying reminder of the funeral a week ago. The casseroles from well-meaning neighbors had finally stopped arriving, and the silence in the house Frank and I had built over 35 years was a physical weight. It was a silence filled with the ghost of his laughter, the echo of his footsteps on the hardwood floors. I felt hollowed out, like a house whose foundations had been ripped away, leaving only a fragile shell. That evening, my son Gregory and his wife Vanessa came over for what they called a comfort dinner. I should have known better. Comfort was the last thing on Vanessa's mind. She swept into my kitchen, her eyes sharp and calculating, scanning every inch of the space. While I was still trying to remember what it felt like to breathe without a constant ache in my chest, she was mentally renovating. "It's got good bones, this place," she'd said, running a perfectly manicured finger along my granite countertop. "A little dated, of course, but nothing a good overhaul can't fix." Gregory, my son, my only child, just stood there, shifting his weight from foot to foot, avoiding my eyes. He was 45, but next to his wife, he always seemed like a teenager waiting for instructions. We sat at the dining table, the same one where we'd celebrated every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every small victory since he was a boy. I moved the pot roast around my plate, the food tasteless in my mouth. Vanessa did most of the talking, her voice a smooth, polished veneer over something hard and cold. She spoke of the market, of asset management, of the complexities of modern finances. It was all a prelude, a carefully constructed stage for the main event. Finally, she placed her fork down with a delicate click. "Mom, the nouning, you have had a terrible shock. And at your age, dealing with the stress of a big house like this, all the bills, the upkeep, and the company, it's just too much." I glanced at Gregory. He was staring intently at his plate, as if the secrets of the universe were hidden in his mashed potatoes. "Greg and I have been talking," Vanessa said, reaching across the table to place her cool hand on my arm. I instinctively flinched. "And we think we've found the perfect solution. There's a wonderful senior living community just outside of town, the Willows. It's more like a resort, really. They handle everything: meals, cleaning, medical staff on site. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." The silence that followed was deafening. The Willows. I'd seen the brochures. It was a place you went to wait to die. "And what about my home?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Gregory finally looked up. His eyes held a flicker of something, maybe shame, before it was extinguished by a practiced resolve. "Mom, it's what Dad would have wanted. For you to be safe, cared for." "This house is an asset, Eleanor," Vanessa cut in, her voice losing its gentle edge. "A significant one. It's too much for one person to manage. It's best if we handle the estate. We'll take care of selling it." "And the company?" I pressed, a cold dread creeping up my spine. "Wilson Construction. Frank and I started it with nothing but a used pickup truck and a toolbox." "That's far too complex," Vanessa said dismissively. "Gregory will take over his father's seat. It's the natural order of things. He can manage the financial side of things for you." It was then that the true nature of their visit became horrifyingly clear. They weren't just suggesting I move out. They were suggesting I was incompetent. They wanted to take everything, my home, my husband's legacy, my independence, and tuck me away in a furnished room where I wouldn't be a bother. "We've already spoken to a lawyer," Gregory mumbled, looking back down at his plate. "Just to get the paperwork in order, for power of attorney, to make things easier on you." Power of attorney. The phrase hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They thought I was old and grieving and stupid. They saw me as a problem to be managed, a loose end to be tied up so they could get their hands on the money. My love of the eye was gone 1 week, and his son was already trying to erase me. I looked at Gregory, at the face I once knew better than my own, and saw a stranger, a weak, greedy stranger who would let his wife gut my life for a real estate commission. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't argue. A different emotion, something colder and harder than grief, began to form in the pit of my stomach. I simply nodded slowly. "I see," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I'll need some time to think about your generous offer." Vanessa smiled, a triumphant little smirk. She thought she'd won. They both did. As they left, she gave my arm a final, patronizing pat. "Take all the time you need, Mom. We'll be in touch with the lawyer next week." I stood at the door and watched their car pull away, its red taillights disappearing into the darkness. The house was silent again. But now it wasn't a sad silence. It was the silence of a battlefield before the first shot is fired. They had made a terrible mistake. They had mistaken my grief for weakness, and they had forgotten who I was. Sleep was a distant country I couldn't visit. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's smug smile, heard Gregory's mumbled excuses. Power of attorney. The words echoed in the cavern of my grief. They wanted to turn me into a ghost in my own life. I got out of bed, the floorboards cold beneath my bare feet. I didn't turn on the lights. I knew my way around this house in the dark. It was a part of me, every creak and groan as familiar as my own heartbeat. I went down to the basement, the air cool and smelling of damp earth and old memories. In the far corner, behind a stack of holiday decorations and boxes of Gregory's childhood memorabilia, was a set of old metal filing cabinets. My fingers, stiff with age, fumbled with the latch on the bottom drawer. It squeaked open. Inside were dozens of old accounting ledgers, their cardboard covers softened with time. Before Wilson Construction was a multi-million-dollar company with a proper office and a team of accountants, it was just Frank, me, and a dream. He was the muscle and the vision, I was the numbers. For the first 10 years, I was the bookkeeper, the payroll department, the tax preparer. I'd balance these books on our kitchen table while Gregory was sleeping in his crib nearby. I pulled one out. The year 1988, written on the spine in my own cursive handwriting. I opened it. The pages were filled with neat columns of figures, every expense and every dollar of income meticulously recorded. I ran my fingers over the numbers. They weren't just numbers. They were stories. There was the entry for the loan we took out to buy our first backhoe. I remembered the terror and excitement of signing that paper, the weight of the debt feeling like a mountain. There was the invoice for the Miller job, our first big contract, the one that put us on the map. I remembered staying up for 2 straight nights to make sure the bid was perfect. I remembered the celebration dinner when we won it. We went to a steakhouse, a rare luxury back then, and felt like a king and queen. I pulled out another ledger, from 1992. I saw the entry where I documented the sale of my grandmother's diamond necklace. We'd hit a rough patch, a contractor had defaulted, and we were on the verge of losing everything. I sold it, without telling Frank, using the money to cover payroll so our guys could feed their families. When he found out, he didn't speak to me for a day. His pride was so hurt. The next night, he came home with a single, perfect rose and a promise that one day he'd buy me a diamond for every star in the sky. He never did buy me a sky full of diamonds, but he gave me a life full of love and partnership, a life these ledgers chronicled. My mind wasn't failing. My mind had built this company. My eyes fell on a particular page from 1995. It was a projection for a new housing development. My notes were scribbled in the margins, questioning the developer's finances, flagging inconsistencies in their proposal. I remembered that fight. Frank had been optimistic, ready to jump in. I was the one who held back, who insisted on a deeper background check. I spent a week digging,
making calls, checking references. I found out the developer was on the brink of bankruptcy. I'd saved us from a catastrophic loss. Frank had stormed out of the house, furious that I'd gone behind his back. He'd come back hours later, pulled me into his arms, and whispered, "You know this company better than I do, Elle. It's in your blood. Never forget that. Never forget that." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Grief had made me forget. The shock of his sudden illness, the blur of the hospital, the funeral, it had all clouded my memory and my spirit. I had let myself become the frail old woman Vanessa saw, a soft target. But sitting there on the cold concrete floor, the smell of old paper filling my lungs, I wasn't just Eleanor Wilson, grieving widow. I was Eleanor Wilson, co-founder of Wilson Construction, the woman who knew every dollar in and every dollar out, the woman who had taught Frank the difference between gross profit and net profit. I closed the ledger. My hands were no longer trembling. The ache in my chest was still there, a permanent resident now, but it was joined by something else. A cold, clear anger. A resolve that felt like steel solidifying in my veins. They thought I was a relic from a bygone era. They thought my mind was as dated as the floral wallpaper in my living room. They were about to find out that while wallpaper can be stripped away, foundations are made of stone. I went back upstairs, not to my empty bed, but to Frank's office. I sat in his big leather chair. It still smelled faintly of his Old Spice aftershave. For a moment, the grief threatened to overwhelm me again. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and pushed it down. There would be time for tears later. Now was the time for war. I turned on his computer. It hummed to life, illuminating the dark room. I didn't know what I was looking for. Not exactly. But I knew I had to start somewhere. They had given me a timeline. 2 weeks. I would use every single second. They had woken a sleeping giant. The next morning, the world felt different. The sun streaming through the kitchen window seemed sharper. The coffee tasted stronger. The fog of grief had lifted just enough for me to see the battlefield clearly. My first call was to James Peterson, the man who had been our family and business lawyer for over 30 years. I expected a sympathetic ear, a loyal ally ready to charge into battle with me. I was wrong. "Eleanor, it's good to hear from you. I am so terribly sorry for your loss." He began, his voice the epitome of professional compassion. "Thank you, James," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need your help. Gregory and Vanessa were here last night. They want me to sign over power of attorney. They want to sell the house." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't a pause of shock, but of careful consideration. "I see," he said, his tone becoming guarded. "And what are your thoughts on that?" "My thoughts are that it's absurd," I said, my voice tight. "James, they're trying to push me out. I need to know where I stand. What did Frank's will say? What about the company?" This is where the wall went up. It was a wall built of legalese and professional ethics, and it was impenetrable. "Eleanor, as you know, I was Frank's lawyer. I am bound by my fiduciary duty to my late client and the instructions he left in his will, which is currently being processed for probate. I can't simply discuss the contents." "But I'm his wife," I exclaimed, frustration mounting. "His partner." "And I understand that," he said smoothly, "but the law is the law. I can, of course, answer any specific questions you might have about documents that are in your possession or public records you obtain, but I cannot offer a broad overview or interpretation of Frank's estate until the will is formally read. It's a matter of procedure." I felt like I was hitting my head against a brick wall. He was telling me that unless I already knew the answers, he couldn't help me find them. It was a maddening catch-22. I hung up the phone feeling more alone than ever. He wasn't an enemy, but he wasn't the ally I'd hoped for either. He was a gatekeeper, and I didn't have the key. My next move was to go to the source, the Wilson Construction main office. I hadn't set foot in the building in years. Frank had always said he wanted me to relax and enjoy life, that he and Robert Miller, his trusted general manager, had it all under control. Now I realized that enjoying life had also meant being kept in the dark. The lobby was different, sleeker, more modern. A huge abstract painting that looked like a paint factory had exploded hung on the main wall. It was a Vanessa painting if I'd ever seen one. Frank would have hated it. He liked paintings of landscapes and sturdy bridges. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, gave me a bright, plastic smile. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm Eleanor Wilson. I'd like to see Robert Miller, and I'll need copies of the quarterly financial statements."
Her smile faltered. She typed something into her computer, her brow furrowed. "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, it's an honor. Mr. Wilson, Mr. Gregory Wilson, that is, left specific instructions. He said you might be stopping by, and that, well, that you're going through a lot right now." She looked at me with an expression of deep, professional pity that made my skin crawl. "He said to ensure you're not burdened with work matters, and that all requests should be directed through him." I stared at her, my blood turning to ice. He'd moved that fast? He'd locked me out of my own company? "He's my son," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "This is my company. Now get me Robert Miller and the financials." The receptionist shrank back in her chair, picking up the phone. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson. I have to call Mr. Gregory." I knew it was no use. Causing a scene in the lobby would only feed into the narrative Vanessa was building, that I was an unstable, emotional old woman who couldn't handle her affairs. It was checkmate. I was blocked at every turn. I turned and walked out, my head held high, but my heart was pounding with a mixture of fury and fear. They had anticipated my moves. They had built a fortress around the information I needed, and I was on the outside. I drove home in a daze. The confidence I'd felt in the basement last night was beginning to fray. They weren't just greedy, they were strategic. Vanessa was smart. I had to give her that. She knew how to play the game, how to use corporate structures and social perceptions as weapons. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw my neighbor, Martha, tending to her roses. She waved at me with a gloved hand. Martha had been my friend for 30 years. She knew Frank, she knew me, and she knew Gregory. She was the one who had first planted the seed of suspicion in my mind after the funeral, when she'd seen Vanessa pacing in my yard like a prospective buyer. I was alone. The lawyer was a wall, the company was a fortress. But maybe I wasn't entirely without allies. I had been a wife, a mother, a bookkeeper, but I had also been a friend. And sometimes friendship was a key that could open doors no lawyer would touch. I needed to think differently. If I couldn't break down the front door, I would have to find a window someone had left unlocked. That evening, I sat in Frank's armchair, the professional walls they had built around me feeling higher than ever. Direct confrontation had failed. I couldn't outmuscle them at the office or outmaneuver them with the lawyer. I needed leverage. I needed information that wasn't locked in a filing cabinet or hidden behind attorney-client privilege. I needed a human element. I thought of my daughter, Jessica. My heart ached when I thought of her. She was 10 years younger than Gregory, a surprise baby who had brought so much light into our lives. She was different from her brother. Where Gregory was malleable and eager to please, Jessica was fiercely independent and had a strong sense of right and wrong. She was a tenured history professor at the University of Washington in Seattle. She had a life of her own, a world away from the petty dramas of our small town. I hesitated to drag her into this ugliness. It felt like a betrayal of her peace. But I was fighting for my life, for my husband's legacy. I had no other choice. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. "Mom, is everything okay?" she answered, her voice filled with immediate concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm fine," I lied,
forcing a lightness into my tone that I didn't feel. "I was just sitting here thinking of you and wanted to hear your voice." We talked for a few minutes about her work, about the weather in Seattle, the small talk that mothers and daughters use to bridge distances. I knew I had to be careful. If I came at her with accusations against her brother, she would get defensive. Family loyalty is a powerful, complicated thing. I had to lead her to the truth, not shove it in her face. "How are Greg and Vanessa?" I asked casually. "I saw them last night. Vanessa seems to be doing very well for herself. She was wearing a beautiful new watch." "Oh, that," Jessica said, her voice dropping a little. "Yeah, she's been spending a lot lately. I think she's trying to land a big client." "That's wonderful," I said, keeping my voice even. "I know Gregory has always been so proud of his ambition. I hope his own job is going well. Is he still happy with his salary at the tech firm?" Another pause, this one longer. "Mom, to be honest, I'm a little worried about them," she finally admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "Greg lost that promotion he was up for a few months ago. He was really counting on it. And Vanessa's real estate business isn't as solid as she makes it out to be. She talks a big game, but she's mostly selling mid-range condos. She's desperate to break into the luxury market." The first crack in the wall. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice full of genuine sympathy for the son I thought I had. "They must be under a lot of stress. It's so important to save for a rainy day. I remember how hard Frank and I worked to build up the Gregory College Fund. We wanted him to have a good start without the burden of debt." That was the key. The mention of the college fund I'd sacrificed for, juxtaposed with their current recklessness. She sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "I know, Mom. That's what's so frustrating. They're living way beyond their means. Credit card debt up to their eyeballs. I saw a statement once, by accident. It was staggering. Vanessa keeps talking about this big score that's going to solve all their problems." My blood ran cold. I was the big score. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I don't want to put you in the middle of anything. But Vanessa, she suggested that I move out of the house. She suggested Gregory should take over all the finances." The line went dead silent. I could practically hear the gears turning in Jessica's head, the pieces clicking into place. "She what?" Jessica finally whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "Oh, Mom, no! She thinks I'm not capable anymore. She wants power of attorney. That's monstrous. That's a hostile takeover. Mom, Greg would never—" "Would he?" "He was sitting right there, Jess. He agreed with her." I heard her take a shaky breath. I need to think," she said, her voice firm now, the hesitation gone, replaced with the same steel I was feeling in my own spine. "Yes, I will. Right now. Mom, what are you going to do?"
"I'm going to fight, sweetheart," I said. "Your father didn't raise a victim, and neither did I." We hung up. A few minutes later, my computer pinged, an email from Jessica. Attached were a half-dozen messages. I opened the first one. It was from Vanessa. Subject: Family Investment Opportunity. "Hey, Jess," it read. "Hope you're well. Quick question for you, since you're so good with words. Greg and I are thinking of presenting a business proposal to your dad, a way to help him manage his assets as he gets older. We need to frame it in a way that makes Eleanor feel secure and cared for, not like she's losing control. Any ideas on the best language to use?" I scrolled through the rest. They were all the same. Cold, calculating, manipulative. She was polling Jessica for the best way to emotionally manipulate her own parents. But she had made a mistake. She had put it in writing. This was more than leverage. This was ammunition. I now had proof of intent. I printed every single email, my hands steady. The wall the lawyer had put up had a door, and Jessica, my smart, brave daughter, had just handed me the key. My next stop was not a lawyer's office. It was a meeting I had to arrange very, very carefully. The next day, I didn't go to the Wilson construction office. I knew that was Gregory's territory now, a place where I would be treated like a doddering old relic. Instead, I made a phone call. "Robert Miller's office?" answered a professional voice. "This is Eleanor Wilson," I said calmly. "Please tell Robert I'd like to meet with him for coffee, not at the office. Tell him to meet me at the corner bakery on Elm Street in 1 hour, and tell him to come alone." It was a risk. I was pulling him away from his job and asking for a clandestine meeting. If he reported it to Gregory, it would confirm their narrative that I was unstable and secretive. But my gut, the same gut that had saved our company from that bad developer 30 years ago, told me Robert's loyalty was to Frank, not to the son who was actively tarnishing his father's name. I arrived at the corner bakery first and chose a small booth in the back, away from the windows. I ordered a black coffee and laid the printed emails face down on the table next to me. My heart was a steady drum against my ribs. Everything depended on this meeting. Robert Miller walked in exactly on time. He was a tall, sturdy man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a handshake as solid as the foundations his crews poured. He'd started with Frank as a young foreman and had worked his way up to general manager. He was more than an employee. He was a disciple of Frank's philosophy of quality, integrity, and hard work. He slid into the booth opposite me, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Eleanor, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Is everything all right?" "No, Robert, it isn't. I'm going to get right to the point. I know Gregory has told the staff not to speak with me, that I am not to be burdened. Let me be clear. I am not burdened. I am being sidelined." Robert's gaze didn't waver. He just nodded slowly, waiting. Gregory and his wife want to take control of everything. They want power of attorney. They want to sell my home. And they want to run the company into the ground to fund their lifestyle. I have been concerned about some of Gregory's recent financial requests. He's been pushing for the company to take on more debt to finance speculative projects. High-risk, high-reward things Frank would never have touched. I've been blocking them, but he's getting more insistent. "It's worse than that," I said. I slid the stack of printed emails across the table. "Read them." Robert put on his reading glasses and picked up the first page. I watched his face as he read. His jaw tightened, his brow furrowed in a deep line of anger. He read every single page, his silence growing heavier with each one. When he was finished, he carefully stacked the papers and pushed them back toward me. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I knew she was ambitious," he said, his voice rough with disgust. "But this is predatory. To plot against you while Frank was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "They think I'm weak, Robert. They think my mind is gone." He looked me straight in the eye. "My wife's mother had Alzheimer's, Eleanor. I know what a failing mind looks like. You are not that. You are grieving. There's a difference." In that moment, I knew I had my ally. Frank respected you more than anyone. He always said you were the real brains of the operation. "Then I need your help," I said. "I'm locked out. I need access. I need to know the true financial state of the company, and I need to know how deep Gregory's problems run." He stared into his coffee cup for a long moment, making his decision. When he looked up, his eyes were clear and resolved. Frank set up a secondary access portal for the accounting system for me, for emergency use. He called it the legacy portal. He was always worried something might happen. Gregory doesn't know about it. I can give you the login credentials, but you have to be careful. Every keystroke is logged. What about Gregory's requests? I asked. You mentioned he was asking for money. Robert's expression darkened. It's more than requests. For years, Frank allowed him to take advances. Frank was soft on him, always hoping he'd mature. He insisted we log them as formal internal loans, complete with repayment schedules that Gregory never, ever met. Frank kept a separate private ledger, a handwritten one. He said it was for a day of reckoning if it ever comes. He kept it in a locked drawer in his old desk at the office. My heart leapt. A private ledger. Is it still there? Robert nodded. As far as I know. Gregory never uses that old desk. He had Vanessa redecorate the whole office. Thinks it's just old junk. I need that book, Robert. He thought for a moment. I can get it. I'll say I'm clearing out Frank's personal effects to send to you. Gregory won't question it. He'll be happy to have the old junk gone. We sat in silence for another minute, two co-conspirators planning a coup. Eleanor, Robert said, finally, what's your endgame here? What are you going to do? I looked at him, the man who was risking his job and his loyalty to help me. I'm going to do what your wife's mother couldn't. I'm going to save myself. And then? I'm going to save my husband's company. He nodded, a slow, grim smile touching his lips. Frank would be damn proud. That evening, a package was delivered to my door. A simple cardboard box. Inside, beneath some of Frank's old fishing trophies and a framed photo of our first work truck, was a plain, black, hardcover ledger. I opened it. Frank's familiar, strong handwriting filled the pages. Dates, amounts, and notes. Loan for investment opportunity in tech startup. Advance for down payment on new car for Vanessa. Personal loan, reason undisclosed.
Page after page of betrayal. I went to the last page and saw the final tally, circled twice. $120,450.22. They didn't just want my future. They had been stealing my past, one loan at a time. The book felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of Frank's disappointment and my son's deceit. This wasn't just a business document, it was a ledger of lies. The black ledger sat on my dining room table like a silent accusation. For 2 days, I did nothing but study its contents and use the legacy portal login Robert had given me. I cross-referenced every entry in the ledger with the company's official accounting records. It was all there, cleverly disguised. The loans to Gregory were coded as consulting fees or project development expenses for projects that never existed. It was a systematic, deliberate siphoning of funds. Armed with the emails from Jessica, the ledger from Robert, and a complete picture of the financial fraud, I knew it was time to face the lawyer again. I called James Peterson's office and scheduled an appointment. This time, when I walked into his mahogany-paneled office, I felt no fear. I was not a grieving widow asking for scraps of information. I was a woman holding a royal flush, and I was ready to play my hand. I sat opposite James at his large, polished desk. He gave me the same professionally sympathetic look. Eleanor, good to see you again. I hope you're doing as well as can be expected. I'm doing much better, James, thank you. My voice crisp and clear. I opened my briefcase, Frank's old leather briefcase, and laid the stack of printed emails on his desk. I believe you said he could only answer specific questions about documents I possess. Here are some documents. James put on his glasses and read through the emails from Vanessa. His professional demeanor didn't crack, but I saw a muscle twitch in his jaw.
He read them all without comment. "This is troubling," he said, choosing his words carefully. "It's a conspiracy to commit fraud against an elder, James," I corrected him. "Next." I placed the black ledger on top of the emails. "This is my husband's private ledger documenting over $120,000 in undisclosed, unrepaid loans to my son, Gregory Wilson. These loans were disguised in the company's official books, which I have also reviewed. That's called embezzlement." James opened the ledger. He recognized Frank's handwriting instantly. He flipped through a few pages, his expression grim. He was a good man, but he was a lawyer first. He was still waiting for the question only he could answer. The walls were still up, but I could see the cracks forming. It was time to take a sledgehammer to them. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on his desk. I looked him directly in the eye, and I asked the question that I had been practicing for 2 days, the question that was the culmination of all my digging. "James," I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "I am not going to ask you what is in Frank's will. I am going to ask you a specific yes or no question based on my own research and understanding. Are you ready?" He leaned back in his chair, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Proceed," I began, speaking each word with precision. "Is it true that approximately 5 years ago, my husband, Frank Wilson, with your legal assistance, created an irrevocable living trust known as the Wilson Family Legacy Trust?" James' eyes widened slightly. "Go on. Is it true that Frank then transferred 100% of his ownership stake in Wilson Construction, LLC, into that trust?" A long silence. James stared at me, his lawyerly mask finally falling away, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated admiration. "And finally, James," I said, delivering the final blow, "is it true that the sole designated beneficiary of the Wilson Family Legacy Trust, upon his death, is me, his wife, Eleanor May Wilson?" The silence in the room was absolute. It stretched for a full 10 seconds. Then James Peterson leaned back in his big leather chair, and a slow, wide smile spread across his face. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect, "now that is a question I can answer." He stood up, walked over to a large, imposing safe tucked behind a painting of a courthouse, and began to turn the dial. "Frank always said you were the smartest person he ever knew. He said if anyone could figure this out on their own, it would be you. He made me promise not to give you any hints. He said your victory had to be your own." The safe clicked open. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on the desk in front of me with a satisfying thud. The portfolio was embossed with gold letters. "The Wilson Family Legacy Trust." "Congratulations, Mrs. Wilson. You've just asked the question that unlocks everything. The answer to all 3 of your questions is yes. According to this document, you are not just the grieving widow. You are the sole and undisputed owner of Wilson Construction." I placed my hand on the cool leather of the portfolio. It felt like I was touching my entire life, my past and my future, all at once. The walls had come crashing down. I wasn't just a beneficiary of my husband's legacy. I was the legacy. I opened the portfolio. The pages were filled with dense legal language, but James Peterson was there to be my translator. For the next hour, he walked me through the intricate, brilliant, and heartbreakingly loving plan that my husband had secretly built to protect me. Frank came to me about 5 years ago. He just had a health scare, a small one. He passed it off as indigestion, but it shook him. He said it made him think about the future, about your future. He pointed to the first section. "This is the formation of the trust. It's an irrevocable trust, which is key. That means once assets are in it, they can't be easily taken out. It's like a financial fortress. He made himself the trustee for his lifetime, and he named me as the successor trustee, with instructions to pass full control to you, the sole beneficiary, upon his death. He explained that Frank had transferred his entire ownership of Wilson Construction into this trust. On paper, to the outside world, nothing had changed. He was still the CEO, the boss, but in legal reality, the company no longer belonged to Frank Wilson the man. It belonged to the trust. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered, my throat tight. It was the one question that still stung. James's expression softened. He was a proud man, Eleanor, and he was from a generation that believed a husband's duty was to shield his wife from worry. He told me he saw how much Gregory's behavior stressed you out. He saw Vanessa's ambition. He was afraid that if something happened to him, they would pressure you, manipulate you into giving up control. He said, "I want Eleanor to have the choice. She can sell it, she can run it, she can burn it to the ground, but it has to be her choice, not theirs."
It wasn't a betrayal. It was an act of profound love. He was protecting my freedom. He trusted me to be strong, but he didn't want me to have to fight for what was already mine. He just never imagined they would strike so fast, so viciously, before the will was even read. Then, James turned the page to the next section, and my breath caught in my throat. "Now, for the master stroke," James said, a hint of awe in his voice. Frank knew the house was their primary target. It's a valuable property, liquid, easy to sell. So he took that temptation off the table. He explained that 3 years ago, Frank had taken out a massive mortgage on our home, a home we had owned outright for over a decade. He borrowed $375,000 against it. "But why?" I asked, confused. "We didn't need the money." "Exactly," James said with a grim smile. The bank gave him the check for $375,000, and he immediately deposited the entire amount into the Wilson Family Legacy Trust, your trust, Eleanor. He essentially mortgaged the house to himself. To them, the house looks like a quick payday. In reality, any buyer would have to pay off the $375,000 bank lien first, leaving almost nothing left for them to grab. He drained the asset of its immediate value. I stared at the paperwork, my mind reeling. It was brilliant, a scorched earth defense prepared years in advance. He had anticipated their greed with pinpoint accuracy. So the money is sitting in a high-yield investment account under the trust's name, safe and sound, and all yours. I felt a wave of dizziness. In the space of one afternoon, I had gone from being a penniless widow about to be evicted to the sole owner of a multi-million-dollar company with a secret war chest of nearly $500,000. But Frank wasn't done. There was one last piece to his architectural defense. "And the ledger," James said, gesturing to the black book on his desk. He told me about that too. He called it his heartbreak file. He said he hoped he'd never have to use it, but he documented every penny Gregory took. He did it so that if a day like this ever came, you would have the proof you needed to show Gregory's character. It wasn't about the money for Frank. It was about the betrayal. I finally understood. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The trust, the mortgage, the ledger. It was a three-pronged strategy designed to protect me and the company we had built together. It was Frank's final project, his last great act of construction. He had built me a fortress, handed me a shield, and armed me with a sword. I closed the portfolio. The grief was still there, a deep, resonant ache for the man I had lost. But it was now mingled with an overwhelming sense of gratitude and love for his foresight, his intelligence, his fierce, protective heart. I looked up at James, my eyes clear. The time for discovery was over. "So what happens now?" James asked gently. "Now," I said, my voice as steady as concrete, "now we schedule a board meeting, an emergency board meeting, and I want everyone there.
Gregory, Vanessa, Robert Miller, my daughter Jessica, and Frank's brother, Thomas. It's time for the reading of a different kind of will. James Peterson's smile returned. I'll make the calls. The conference room at the main office, day after tomorrow? Perfect, I replied. Let them walk into their own territory. It will make the victory that much sweeter. The next 48 hours were a blur of focused activity. The grief was packed away in a box and put on a high shelf. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged resolve. I was no longer a victim reacting to events. I was a general, planning a campaign. James Peterson handled the official invitations. He called each person and informed them of an emergency board meeting regarding the future of the Wilson construction estate. The formal, legalistic language was designed to be both intimidating and non-negotiable. As expected, Vanessa and Gregory agreed immediately, no doubt assuming this was the meeting where I would formally surrender and they would be crowned king and queen. I called my daughter Jessica myself. It's time, sweetheart. I need you here, not just for me, but as a witness for your father. I'm on the next flight out of Seattle, she said, without hesitation. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I also called Thomas, Frank's older brother. He was a retired history teacher, a quiet, decent man who embodied the family's old-fashioned values of integrity and honor. Thomas, I said, there are some things you need to know about the state of Frank's company and the behavior of your nephew. I need you there to represent the conscience of this family. He agreed, his voice heavy with concern. While James prepared the legal documents for presentation, copies of the trust, the mortgage agreement, the ledger, I prepared myself. That night, I went through my closet. I pushed past the muted colors of mourning, the soft cardigans and sensible shoes I had been living in. In the very back, preserved in a garment bag, was a charcoal gray pantsuit I hadn't worn in years. It was a power suit, one I had bought for a major contract negotiation long ago. The fabric was sharp, the lines clean and unforgiving. I pulled it out. The next morning, I didn't dress as Eleanor the widow. I dressed as Eleanor the CEO. I put on the suit. It fit perfectly. I did my hair not in its usual soft bun, but styled back from my face. I put on a touch of lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a frail 68-year-old woman. I saw the woman who stared down bankers and battled with union leaders. I saw the woman who had helped build an empire from dust. I was ready. Robert Miller was my inside man. He made sure the main conference room at the office was prepared. It was a room I knew well, but it had been changed by Vanessa's touch. The solid oak table Frank loved was gone, replaced by a sleek glass and chrome monstrosity. The chairs were uncomfortable leather and steel contraptions. The whole room felt cold and impersonal, like them. Robert told me Gregory and Vanessa had been strutting around the office all morning, acting like they already owned the place. Gregory's been telling people about a new direction for the company, and Vanessa has been measuring the executive offices for new furniture. They have no idea what's coming. Good, I said. Let them climb as high as they can. The fall will be that much greater. An hour before the meeting, my team assembled at my house. James arrived with his briefcase, a quiet confidence radiating from him. Jessica arrived from the airport, her eyes blazing with protective fire, and gave me a long, fierce hug. Thomas came, his face etched with worry but his posture resolute. And Robert Miller, my loyal keeper of the keys. We sat around my old, warm wooden dining table, the opposite of the one awaiting us at the office. I laid out the plan. James will present the legal framework, I explained. Robert will confirm the operational and financial details. Jessica and Thomas, you are the moral compass. But the main presentation, that will come from...
I looked at each of them. I want to be clear. This is not just about money or a company. It's about a lifetime of work. It's about my husband's legacy, and it's about drawing a line in the sand. Today, we teach them the meaning of respect. There were no more words needed. We were a united front, a small army marching into enemy territory. As we prepared to leave, I walked into Frank's office one last time. I picked up a small, framed photo from his desk. It was of the two of us, young and smiling, standing in front of our very first project, a small garage we'd built for a neighbor. We were covered in sawdust and sweat, but we looked like we owned the world. I slipped the photo into my briefcase. I needed to remember the woman I was then to be the woman I needed to be today. We drove to the office in separate cars, a silent procession. As I pulled into the parking lot of Wilson Construction, I took one last deep breath. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The curtain was about to rise on the final act of their little tragedy. The conference room was cold, just as I'd expected. The air conditioning was on full blast, chilling the air to an uncomfortable degree. Gregory and Vanessa were already seated at the head of the glass cable, positioned as if they were presiding. Vanessa was glowing with smug triumph, tapping her pen on a notepad. Gregory just looked nervous, constantly adjusting his tie. My team and I filed in and took our seats opposite them. Robert Miller sat to my right, James Peterson to my left. Jessica and Thomas sat further down, a silent jury. The geography of the room was clear. It was us against them. "Well, everyone's here," Vanessa said brightly, taking charge. "Shall we get started? I assume, Eleanor, that this meeting is to formalize the transition we discussed." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment before I spoke. I looked directly at her, my gaze as cold as the room. "There will be a transition, yes, but perhaps not the one you were anticipating." I nodded to James. That was his cue. "This is an emergency meeting of the primary stakeholders of the Wilson Family Legacy Trust," James announced, his voice filling the room with legal authority. He opened his briefcase and began placing bound documents on the table. "As the successor trustee, it is my duty to clarify the governance and ownership of all assets held within said trust." Vanessa's smile tightened. "The what? What trust?" "The irrevocable trust your father-in-law established 5 years ago," James said, looking at her over the rim of his glasses. "The one that holds 100% of the ownership of this company." He slid a copy of the trust's summary page across the table. "As you can see, the sole beneficiary is Eleanor Wilson." The color drained from Vanessa's face. Gregory snatched the paper and stared at it, his mouth hanging open. This can't be right," he stammered. "Dad would have told me." "Your father was a private man," I said calmly. "He kept business and family separate. Clearly, he had his reasons." My gaze shifted to my son. "Speaking of business, Gregory, let's discuss your financial contributions to the company." I slid the black ledger across the gleaming glass surface. It stopped directly in front of him. "An accounting kept by your father," I explained for the benefit of the room, "documenting a series of personal loans you took from company funds. Robert, what is the final tally?" $120,450.22, all logged as business expenses, but for which there are no corresponding receipts or project files. In short, embezzlement. Gregory looked like he was going to be sick. Vanessa shot him a look of pure venom. "You idiot," she hissed under her breath. "And finally," I said, turning my attention back to Vanessa, "there is the matter of my house, your primary target." James took over again. "As part of his estate planning, Mr. Wilson took out a mortgage lien against the property for $375,000. That debt would have to be satisfied before any new owner could take title. The funds from that loan were deposited directly into Mrs. Wilson's trust." It was a triple blow. The trust, the debt, the mortgage. Check, check, check. Vanessa's composure finally shattered. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "This is insane. You can't be serious. He was an old man. He was probably senile. We'll contest this in court. You manipulated him."
Jessica finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage. Manipulated him? You're the one who emailed me for tips on how to emotionally manipulate my own parents. You're the one who called my mother an asset to be managed. That revelation hit Gregory like a physical slap. He shrank in his chair, looking from his furious sister to his raging wife to his stone-faced mother. Thomas Wilson, the quiet historian, simply shook his head, his face a mask of profound disappointment. Gregory, what have you done? The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by Vanessa's ragged breathing. This was the moment. I could have ended it there. I could have had James call security. But that was Frank's plan. I needed to add a move of my own. My final, devastating move. The Queen's Gambit. I leaned forward. "Sit down, Vanessa," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. She was so shocked she actually obeyed. I looked only at my son. I ignored her wife completely, rendering her invisible. "Gregory," I said, "despite all of this, the lies, the theft, you are still my son. So I am going to give you a choice, a one-time offer." The entire room held their breath. Option A. I held up one finger. I instruct my lawyer to begin legal proceedings to recover the $120,000 you stole. You will be terminated from your current job, and I will make sure you are never hired in this industry again. You will leave here with nothing but the clothes on your back and a mountain of debt. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Option B, I continued, holding up a second finger. I will forgive the entire debt, every penny. I will also gift you a 10% non-voting minority stake in this company with dividends to be paid annually. Gregory's eyes widened, a desperate, pathetic flicker of hope in them. Vanessa stared at me, utterly bewildered, searching for the catch. But option B comes with a condition, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, a non-negotiable condition. You will file for divorce from your wife immediately, and you will attend financial and personal counseling for 1 year. The choice is yours, Gregory. The money or her.
But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at my son, who was staring at his wife, truly seeing the source of his ruin for the first time. The choice was his. His soul was on the line. You have 1 week to inform Mr. Peterson of your decision, I said. Then I stood up. This meeting is adjourned. I turned and walked out of the room, my team following me, leaving the wreckage of my son's life smoldering behind us. The aftermath of that meeting was not a clean, triumphant victory parade. It was messy and painful, like the demolition of a building. The sound of Vanessa's screaming followed us down the hall. Robert later told me their argument had been so vicious that security had to escort them from the building separately. The war was over, but the casualties were real. My relationship with my son was in ruins. That was the price of my victory, and it was a heavy one. I had won back my company, my home, my independence. But I had lost a son. Or perhaps I had simply been forced to face the fact that I had lost him long ago. I did not move into a beach house. I discovered that Frank had indeed looked into buying one, but in the end, he hadn't. The real estate agent told me he'd said, "My Eleanor, she's a builder. She'd be bored stiff just watching the tides. She needs a project." He knew me better than I knew myself. So I gave myself a project. With my ownership of Wilson Construction solidified, I took my seat at the head of the table, the old oak one I had Robert bring back from storage. I didn't fire anyone. I didn't make sweeping changes. I simply brought the company back to the principles Frank and I had founded it on: integrity, quality, and community. And I started something new. I used the $375,000 from the trust, Frank's secret war chest,
to establish a new branch of the company, the Wilson Foundation for Second Chances. It wasn't a charity, it was an investment fund. We provided low-interest startup loans, professional mentorship, and financial literacy training for women over 50 who, for whatever reason, divorce, widowhood, career breaks, needed to re-enter the workforce or start their own businesses. My first client was a woman who had been a homemaker for 40 years and whose husband had left her with nothing. We helped her start a catering business. Today, she's one of the most successful caterers in the county. That became my new legacy. Not a quiet retirement, but a new era of building. I wasn't just building structures of wood and steel anymore. I was helping to rebuild lives. 6 months after the board meeting, a letter arrived. It was from Gregory. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a long letter. There were no excuses, no pleas for forgiveness. "Mom," it began. I chose option A. My divorce from Vanessa was finalized last week. I didn't want the money. I realized it was what she had been after all along, and I couldn't touch it. I'm working for a small construction crew out of state, manual labor. It's hard work, but it's honest. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm earning my keep. I've started therapy, like you suggested. My therapist says I have to take responsibility for my own choices. He's right. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me. I'm not sure I can forgive myself. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be a better man, the man you and Dad raised me to be. That was it. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. There were no easy answers. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you could flip. It was a long, winding road, and I didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope for the broken pieces of my son. Today, I'm 70 years old. I go to the office 3 days a week. I sit in the chair my husband once sat in, and I feel his presence not as a ghost of the past, but as a partner in the present. He built the foundation, and I am building the skyscraper. My life is not what I expected it to be. It is quieter in some ways and louder in others. It is a life forged in grief, betrayal, and fire. But it is my life, built with my own 2 hands, and it is a legacy I am proud to call my own.